When you get to be my age, you start thinking more about the past than the future. I reckon that's normal. The bones get stiff, the back doesn't want to bend, and the world doesn't wait for you anymore. You sit a lot, look out windows, maybe talk to a dog that doesn't answer back. I talk to Buck sometimes. He's half blind and deaf as a post, but he listens better than most folks I know. I've lived on this farm all my life, born in the upstairs room with the cracked window that still doesn't shut right. My daddy built most of this house with his own 2 hands, and I helped when I got big enough to swing a hammer. The barn, the well, the smokehouse, they all got pieces of me in them. My blood, my sweat, and more than a few busted knuckles. The town folk call it Lock Ridge Farm, after my granddad's side of the family. He's a mean old bastard, but he kept the land alive. People say it's one of the oldest farms still working out here. Most gave up when the soil turned bad or the kids left. Mine did anyway. I ain't mad at them for it. Can't blame young ones for wanting more than cows and fences and corn. Still, the silence sure does stretch out long when you're the only one left. I rise early still, even though the work's light now. Habit, I guess. Feed the chickens, check the fence lines, walk the edge of the property. That walk's important. Makes me feel like the land still knows I'm watching, like it respects me as much as I do it. The earth here breathes slow, but it remembers. You can tell in the way the trees lean, or how the barn creaks when there ain't a breeze. I got a few folks from town that come by every now and then to help with things. Young Martin helps me with the heavier chores when his school schedule allows. Real nice kid. Doesn't talk much, but he's honest. Folks in town like to chat. They say things like, "Riley, you should sell that place. Move into town, live easier." I always smile and shake my head. I ain't never leaving Lockridge. I belong here. Always have. That's not to say it's all sunshine and good memories. No, sir. Every place with history has its bruises. This farm's got a few deep ones. Old stories, old happenings. Stuff I never told anyone. Not my kids, not my neighbors, not even Mary when she was alive. She knew some of it, yeah, sure. Had good instincts. But some stories stick to your soul like burrs, and you keep them there, buried deep down where no light gets in. That night Jackson came back, rain already tapping soft on the tin roof, I felt something shift, like the land stirred a little in its sleep. Boy looked tired, worn down in a way I remembered from my own youth. That fire inside him, still there though, flickering behind the eyes. He looked like me. Hell, he was me once, just shinier and more restless. And that's when I knew, tonight, I was going to tell him one of the stories I'd never told. I made a pot of coffee after supper. The rain had turned heavier by then, thumping the windows like it was in a hurry to get in. Jackson was curled up in the old chair Mary used to favor, the one with a knitted blanket she never finished, still draped over the back. He'd already kicked off his boots, tracking mud on the rug I always yelled about, but didn't this time. Boy needed peace, not scolding. The farm would clean itself, but souls took longer. I stirred the fire with the iron poker and eased down into my chair. My bones groaned, same as the floorboards. Buck lifted his head from the hearth, blinked once, then settled back down with a grunt. Jackson was watching me. He always had this way of being still when he was thinking hard, like his thoughts needed room to move around. I poured us both a bit of coffee, black as pitch, and handed him a chipped mug with "World's Best Grandpa" faded down the side. He chuckled just a little. "You still drink it like tar, huh?" "Only way it's meant to be," I replied. He sipped, winced. I chuckled. The fire popped and filled the silence. The boy waited, patient now. That was new. When he was 10, he used to interrupt every other sentence. You remember those summer nights I used to tell you stories by the fire? I asked him. His face lit up just a bit. About the crow that liked Tic Tacs? And the dog? I nodded. Mm-hmm. He'd ask me for a story every time you stayed up late. I used to think you believed every word. I did. I still keep Tic Tacs in my pocket, he joked. That made me smile, but not for long. Well, there's stories I never told. Stories I wasn't ready to speak. About this place. About things that ain't easy to carry, I said, setting my mug down. He leaned forward just slightly. It's an old place, this farm, you know that. Older than our name on it. Older than the road that leads to it. But when I was your age, I didn't believe in old things. Thought I could outrun the past. Thought nothing real could hide in dirt. I continued. The wind moved outside, brushing up against the house. I looked at the dark window. Then I began. In 1958, the town nearest our farm was called Bellwater. Wasn't big, just a post office, a gas station, a diner that served ham steak too dry to chew. Folks there were plain and proper, church-going types. Good people mostly, though every town's got a few cracks if you look close enough. That fall, Bellwater changed. The first body was found in early September, behind the grain mill. A drifter, they said. Nobody local. So people didn't pay it too much mind at first. Said it was just bad luck, maybe a robbery gone wrong. But it wasn't. The second body showed up 2 weeks later. A girl named Clarissa Motes, 19. Sweet girl. Her daddy owned the hardware store. She was found behind the church, her arms bent the wrong way, like someone had twisted them backward. Her face was covered with a burlap sack. When the police pulled it off, they saw that her eyes were gone. The town locked up tight after that. Folks stopped letting their kids out past sunset. Men carried hunting rifles even to the grocery. Church attendance, it doubled. That was always how folks here handled fear. Faith and locked doors. A third body came just days later. This time a farmer named Dwayne Prickett. Same pattern. Burlap sack over the head. Eyes missing. The papers tried to quiet it. The sheriff gave careful statements. We're investigating leads, and there's no reason to believe the public is in danger. But people talk, and the stories they told didn't make things better. Some said it was a demon. Others said it was an Indian curse, punishment for all the old sins this land holds under its soil. And one man, old Elbert Marsh, who ran the junkyard, said he'd seen something once out near the woods past my farm. Said he saw a shape too tall to be a man, standing still among the birch trees, watching him. When he lit his lantern, it was gone. Elbert drank too much. Always had. So nobody listened. Except me. See, that patch of woods, that's the same place I used to go trapping when I was a boy. Then they caught him. The killer. Name was Daniel Gray. He was a teacher at the Bellwater School. History and literature. I remembered him. Tall, neat man. Always wore brown corduroy coats and spoke real soft. The kind of man you wouldn't look at twice. They got a tip from a neighbor who said Daniel had been coming home awful late, parking his car behind the house, sometimes with mud all over his shoes, even on dry nights. Police got a warrant. Inside Daniel's house, they found things, drawers full of eyeballs, rotten, dried, some still wet, wrapped in cloth, labeled, cataloged like coins or bugs. Sheriff Taylor said he'd never seen anything like it, not even in the war. Daniel confessed without much fight, said he did it, but he also said something else. He said he wasn't the one who started it. Said he found something out in the woods, that he'd been walking behind the old irrigation canal one day, a place where the trees grow in strange patterns, twisting over each other like bones. He found a hole there, a perfect hole, shaped like a square, lined with stones too smooth to be natural. And inside it, under a rotten deer pelt, was a wooden idol, about 2 feet tall. Looked like a man, if a man had been carved by someone who hated men. Sharp features, long arms, no eyes on the carving, just deep hollows where the eyes should have been. He brought it home, said he felt compelled to. Said it talked to him, not in words, but in feelings. Hunger, mostly. Want. Watching. Daniel said that's when the dreams started. That's when he began to see things. Said he'd lose hours, sometimes whole nights, wake up covered in mud, blood on his hands, eyes burning in his pocket like coins fresh from a furnace. He called it the Watcher. Police thought he was crazy. Sent him to an institution in Lincoln after the trial. Hung himself 3 months in. They burned the idol, they said. Buried the ashes. But I don't think it mattered. Some things don't burn right. Some things leave splinters. Well, the town tried to move on. Tried to hang everything on Daniel Gray, the teacher with a quiet voice and the drawer full of eyes. But the truth is, things kept happening after he was gone. Folk still disappeared. Maybe not as often, but often enough to notice. It always happened the same way. Someone would go missing, usually alone, always near the woods. Sometimes a hunter, sometimes a teen sneaking out, sometimes just an unlucky soul walking home late from the tavern. Then days later, they'd be found. Not deep in the forest, no, always at the edge, just outside the ring where the trees start to thicken. Like someone had brought them to the edge and dropped them there. Like a cat dropping a bird on a porch. Limbs broken, arms bent wrong, legs twisted. Some of their necks were turned all the way around. And every time their eyes were gone. Not just missing. Gone. No bleeding around the sockets. Like they hadn't been yanked out, so much as erased. People said Daniel Gray's evil lived on. Others said it wasn't him at all. That the Watcher had only used him. Like a puppet. Like bait. Well, the sheriff did what he could, but the Bellwater department wasn't equipped for much. Just a few deputies, some old cars, and a whole lot of paperwork. They investigated. There was nothing to find. The tracks would stop at the tree line. No prints, no blood trail, no signs of struggle. Just the body, left neatly, and the trees behind it. People stopped talking to each other after a while. Everyone got quieter. Stores started closing early. A few families packed up and left for good. The rest of us just got used to locking our doors and not asking questions. I was only in my early 20s when all this was going on. Still green in a lot of ways. Still stubborn. Still angry. Still scared. I got a letter from an old friend around that time, Sam Carver. He and I served together in the Guard. Sam was different. He grew up in Louisiana, deep country, bayou places where you don't go out after dark unless you want to meet something old. Sam believed in things most men laugh at. Creatures, spirits, rituals. Said his grandmother taught him things not found in books. I didn't believe half of it back then. But when I told him in a letter what was happening in Bellwater, he didn't laugh. He wrote me back quick. Said, "Riley, what you got on that land sounds like something hungry. Sounds like it's been fed. You need to starve it, and you need to seal the land before it grows stronger." I read that line 3 times. Sam gave me instructions. Not a spell, not really. He called it a containment rite. Said it was old, real old, rooted in something deeper than religion, something older than the Bible. It wasn't about worship. It was about warning. The first thing I had to do was lay a perimeter, a wide one. Sam told me to walk the full property line and mark it in powdered iron and salt. No gaps, no skips. If the circle wasn't whole, it wouldn't hold. Took me 4 days just to walk it all proper. Every edge, every slope and fence post. I had to climb down ravines and cross the creek more than once. My legs ached for a week after. Finding the iron was harder than the salt. I had to crush down nails, file old tools, even bought scrap metal and ground it myself. The whole time I kept thinking, this is crazy. What am I doing? But I kept at it because the killings weren't stopping. Because I'd seen things move in the trees that shouldn't move. Well, after the iron and salt were down, Sam told me to burn sage. Lots of it. Said the smoke pushed things away, made the space unwelcoming to whatever might be nesting there. I didn't know where to get sage back then. Not from the store, so I drove 2 towns over and found a woman who sold herbs and oils from the back of a hardware shop. She didn't ask questions, just handed me bundles tied in twine. I lit the sage in the house every morning, every night. The place smelled like old wood and smoke for weeks. It hung on the walls, in my clothes, even in Buck's fur. Next came the hardest part. Sam said I had to wait 30 days. He called it a sacred period, 1 full cycle of the moon. During that time, I had to stay on the land, sleep here, keep the fires burning, and not break the salt ring. No drinking, no leaving, just watching, tending, waiting. I did what he said. 30 days I lived by that rule. The days were long, but the nights were worse. The silence had weight to it. I'd hear twigs snap out past the field. Sometimes the chicken would go still for hours. Once or twice, I saw movement at the tree line. Tall things, still things, but nothing ever crossed the boundary. Not once. Then came the final step. Sam told me the land needed something personal, something alive, something that tied me to it completely. He said the creature, the watcher, understood ownership, and it wouldn't respect the barrier unless I offered something of myself. So I did. On the 30th night, I walked out to the oldest tree on the property, the one by the southern fence, the one that moved when I was a boy. I brought a knife and a steel bowl. No ceremony, no chanting, just me, the tree, and the dark. I looked at my palm. I cut in, deep enough to sting, and let the blood pour into the bowl. When it was near full, I poured it at the base of that tree. The soil soaked it up quick, like it was thirsty. And then something shifted. I don't know how to explain it, not exactly. The woods didn't go silent, and the sky didn't darken. But I felt something turn away, like a big weight moved off the land, like something hungry gave up and crawled back into the dirt. After that, the killing stopped. Just like that. The paper ran a story saying maybe Daniel Gray had a copycat, said maybe the town spooked itself and it all just ended on its own. But I know better. That thing, the Watcher, wasn't finished. It was just contained, held back by effort, sacrifice, in a line in the dirt made from salt, iron, and my own blood. It's still out there, waiting. That was over 60 years ago, and I've kept the line unbroken ever since. But I'm not a young man anymore, and when I go, the circle will go with me. Jackson sat there, frozen like he was made of stone. The mug in his hands had long gone cold, but he didn't notice. His eyes were on me, wide and unsettled, the way a man might look at thunder in the distance and realize it's actually overhead. Wait, you're telling me you did an actual blood ritual on this farm with iron and salt and... Grandpa, what the hell? He said, voice caught between disbelief and something else. I nodded. I did. He blinked, leaned back, and rubbed both hands down his face. This is insane. This is nuts. I thought so too, I began. Back then. But nuts didn't matter much when folks kept dying, I said. He went quiet again, jaw working side to side, trying to make room for what he just heard. The fire cracked low between us. The storm outside thumped gentle against the glass like he was listening in. Wait, I remember Sam. That old guy in the brown leather jacket, right? Was real good with knives? Jackson said. My mouth lifted at the corner. Yeah, that's Sam Carver. He always looked like Clint Eastwood, you know? Even when he was asking for sugar in his tea. Scared the crap out of me when I was little. But I liked him, Jackson said, the smallest grin tugging at his face. Yeah, good man. Knew things most folks didn't want to know. He'd seen things down in the South that cruel your blood, but he never talked about it unless he had to. When I told him what was happening out here, he didn't question it for a second, I said. I always thought he just was some old army buddy who liked coffee. I chuckled. He hated my coffee. Jackson laughed softly, a puff of air more than a sound, but it helped. The weight in the room lifted just a little. He leaned forward, elbows on knees, looking serious again. Wait, so all this time, you've kept it back, alone? I nodded. Well, someone had to, and no one else saw what I saw. He was quiet for a long time after that, staring into the fire, eyes darting like he was playing it all out in his head. So, you think I'll have to take care of it one day? He asked finally. I didn't answer right away. Well, I hope not. But this land's got a memory, and it doesn't forget who tends it. You always had a piece of it in you, even when you were little. You'd ask the right questions. Feel things you shouldn't have known to feel. He gave one slow nod. I mean, okay. I'm not going back to school yet anyway. I smiled. Good. You might learn more here than anywhere else. The fire crackled again, louder this time. Outside, the storm rolled low. Jackson looked over. So, that's the only story you've been sitting on all these years? I leaned back in my chair, eyes on the fire. No, son. That was just the first one. In 1978, the town faced the worst drought I'd ever seen. Hadn't rained in nearly 4 months by the time summer rolled in. The land cracked open. You could see the earth pull apart in long, jagged lines, like it was thirsty enough to split itself just for a drop of water. The creek dried up entirely. Even the mosquitoes left. We tried everything. Hauled water in barrels, prayed in the church twice a week. One group even tried cloud seeding. Nothing worked. Crops died row by row. Livestock thinned out. The feed stores couldn't keep up, and the banks weren't giving out any more loans. People started leaving. First, the feed mill closed, then the tire shop, then the diner. Bellwater had been a good town once, hard-working, close-knit. But that summer, it started to feel like something was pulling it apart, thread by thread. Then the children came. It started small. I remember the first time plain as day. It was just before dawn, and I was headed out to check the well pump. The sun hadn't come up yet, but the sky had that deep gray tint that meant it wasn't far off. And that's when I saw one. A child, standing by the edge of the cornfield, barefoot, staring at the house. She couldn't have been older than 10. Dirty dress, pale skin like milk left out too long. And her eyes, those eyes, were all black. Not like bruises. No whites, no color. Just black from lid to lid. Even in the dim light, I could see him. She didn't move. Didn't say anything. Just watched me. I called out, "You lost, girl?" No answer. Took one step forward, and she backed into the corn, slow and quiet, vanishing between the stalks, like she was never there. I thought maybe I was seeing things. The heat had been bad, and I hadn't slept in weeks. But that wasn't the only time. Within days, others started seeing them too. Kids, always in the early morning or late at night, always standing still, never speaking. One old man swore he saw 3 of them pressed up against the windows of the Baptist church during Sunday evening service. Another woman nearly drove into a ditch when she spotted 2 outside her diner before sunrise. And always, those black eyes. No one knew where they came from. Nobody recognized them. They weren't local. No missing persons reports matched. Police didn't have any leads. And the strangest part, they never heard anyone. They just watched. Some folks tried approaching them, but they'd slip away into the cornfields every time. Always quiet. Always gone right before you could reach them. Then came the harvest, and something changed. Despite the drought, despite everything dying all summer, the cornfields flourished like I'd never seen before. Tall, green, thick with life. Too thick. We didn't plant that much, and we didn't water near enough to explain it. Neighbors started talking. They said it was a miracle. Said maybe our prayers had worked. But deep down, folks knew better. Corn doesn't grow like that out of nowhere. Then the children started vanishing. The real ones. The local kids. First, it was Billy Tanner, 9 years old. Disappeared during a game of hide and seek near the field behind his house. Then it was Ruthie Lang, last seen chasing her dog near the corn. Then the Whitmore twins. Each time, no body, no blood, no sign of struggle. Just gone. But something always got left behind. Corn husk dolls. Each time, laid out at the edge of the field. One per child. Crude, hand-twisted things, tied with old string. They had little round heads, stick arms and legs, and no faces. Sometimes they'd be left on porches, sometimes beside a trailer. One even showed up in a Sunday collection plate. The sheriff organized searches. Dozens of volunteers combed the fields and woods. They brought in dogs, choppers, but nothing turned up. After a while, the town stopped searching. They were scared. Some families moved away. Others locked their kids inside and never let them out after dark again. You couldn't mention the corn without folks getting real quiet. We still needed it, of course, had to harvest, had to sell. But no one went out there alone. We kept the dolls. Over the years, they piled up. Nobody wanted to throw them away. Something about that, it felt wrong, disrespectful, maybe dangerous. So we kept them. I volunteered to take them off folks' hands. They're in the barn loft now, in an old cedar chest with a latch I keep locked. Last I counted, there are 27 of them. Each one different in its own way. Each one a reminder. Folks in town stopped calling it a drought. They called it a curse. Said the town had been marked ever since the murders. Ever since the idol. Ever since something old decided we were worth looking at. And maybe they were right. Wasn't until after my daddy passed that I started to understand the truth of what this land really was. After we buried him up on the hill behind the barn, I went about cleaning out the attic, going through boxes, sorting tools, tossing out old catalogs from 10 years prior. That's when I found the journals. They were hidden behind a false panel in the old cedar wardrobe, tucked away in oilcloth and tied with rotted twine, like someone had gone out of their way to keep them both preserved and secret. At first glance, they looked like regular farming logs, weather notes, crop reports, irrigation details. But further in, the entries changed tone. They became quiet, cautious, written in shorter lines, as if even the act of writing the words was dangerous. And then came the truth, spelled out in careful, uneasy handwriting that belonged to the man who raised me. My father had discovered that the land we'd lived on, worked on, and trusted had a price. A long time ago, he never wrote exactly when, someone in our bloodline had entered into a kind of agreement. It wasn't written in a contract or spoken aloud in any church. It was older than that. The land would provide food, rain, strength of soil, unnatural bounty, but in return, it would demand something, and not just something small. It wanted youth, life, a child's soul once in a while, offered quietly and without question. That's why, he wrote, the cornfields never failed, even in years where everything else withered. Our fields grew tall. That's why we had fewer pests, more rain, richer soil. The land wasn't generous. It was hungry. The disappearances weren't random. They were sacrifices. Not done by hand. There were no rituals with knives or ceremonies by firelight. No one was killing children directly. But when a child went missing in Bellwater, always near the cornfields, always without warning, it was never a mystery. Not to my father. It was the agreement keeping itself balanced. And he let it happen. He hated it, but he let it continue. And year after year, our land stayed green while others turned brown. And worse, it didn't stop with the missing. According to his journals, the spirits of those children didn't move on. They became part of the corn, fused to it somehow. Not buried, not at peace. Their spirits hung there like dew on the stalks, lingering just out of sight. He wrote about seeing them, pale figures, darting between rows, laughing softly like they were still playing games. They weren't angry, not exactly, but they were hollow, changed. They'd become something else. I didn't want any part of it. I made a decision, and it wasn't an easy one. I wasn't going to be another quiet caretaker to an old, blood-fed bargain. But I also knew you couldn't just walk away from something like that. You couldn't burn it out or ignore it. The corn didn't care about feelings. It only responded to action. So I did what I could. I learned from what my father had written, and from what Sam had taught me before. I started performing yearly protections. Not spells or curses, just old things, meant to push back spirits and keep the land clean. I ran iron plows through the dirt every year at the end of harvest, breaking up the ground with metal that spirits can't cross. I burned sage, not just around the house, but in the fields too, especially near the edges where the sightings happened most often. I walked the boundaries every spring and every fall, laying salt in lines where the wind seemed to stop short, and every year I whispered a small offering of thanks, not to the corn, but to the one still caught inside it. I never asked anything in return, and for a while, the land stayed quiet. The corn still grows, but now it grows from honest work, not from blood. The yields are smaller, but real. The soil is harder to manage, but it's mine, not some old spirit's borrowed gift. The price has stopped. As far as I know, no children have vanished since I began the rituals. At least not from our town, not from Bellwater. But that doesn't mean the danger's gone. The children are still out there, or whatever's left of them. Every now and then, when I'm walking the rows in the late season light, I see movement, a little head ducking between stalks, a figure too still for comfort, just standing among the green. And the laughter. They're still waiting. They don't come near the house anymore, but they're in the corn, deep in it, twisting through roots and husks like memories you can't shake loose. And they haven't forgotten what the land took from them. Jackson was quiet for a long time after that. He stared into the low fire like he could see every single ghost I'd just described standing in the corn outside. He shifted in the chair, sat up straighter, rubbed both hands through his hair. You're telling me there's kids? Spirits? Still in the corn? Still watching? Waiting, I said. Jackson looked at me hard. And you live here like that's normal? I gave a small shrug. It's not normal, but it's mine, and I've kept it contained. For a long time. He shook his head, but not in disbelief this time. More like he was trying to process something that didn't fit the shape of the world he'd grown up in. So every time I played near those fields as a kid, I was watching you, I interrupted. I was always close, always with iron on me. You never wandered too far. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. And no one in town knows about this? Not really? No, not really. Some folks suspect, some whisper, but they don't want to know the truth. Truth's heavy. It makes things break, I replied. The room was still, save for the old clock ticking above the fireplace. Jackson let out a long breath, finally looked me in the eye. I can't believe I used to hide in those fields. I used to think they were peaceful. They are peaceful, but peace comes at a price. That's why you gotta respect it, I said. He nodded slowly, then stood up, stretched, and walked to the window. He pulled back the curtain just a sliver and looked out toward the dark line of the cornfields in the distance. I didn't ask what he saw. Jackson smiled, faint but genuine. All right, you freaked me out with monsters, blood rituals, and black-eyed ghost kids. Is that the end of story hour? He said, coming back to the chair. I took a long sip from my coffee, lukewarm and bitter, and shook my head. Well, just one more tonight. But you'll like this one. Why's that? He asked. Because it's about your grandma Iris. And it's not a story about death or curses or things hiding in the dark. Jackson raised an eyebrow. So what's it about? I smiled, leaned back in the chair. It's about love, and what love looks like when the world around you is trying to rot. Back then, I was still young, unmarried, living quiet, most days spent knee-deep in work. The land kept me busy, and I didn't mind the solitude. I'd hunt in the fall, mostly for meat, sometimes just to keep an eye on the edges of the property. That's where it started. It was one of those early autumn evenings where the sky glowed soft orange and everything smelled like dry leaves. I was in the woods, maybe a mile past the creek, bow slung over my shoulder, when I saw her. First, thought she was just another person, lost maybe, from town or passing through. But there was something off. She stood in the clearing, barefoot, even though the earth was sharp with pine needles. Her dress was light, flowing, almost too fine for a place like this, like silk draped over old moss. Her hair was long and dark, curled like it caught the wind even when there wasn't any. And her eyes, bright green, like spring vines, clear as glass. She didn't seem startled. She wasn't afraid. Just calm. There was something in the way she looked at me, steady and quiet, like she already knew me. I offered to walk her back to town, though she never quite said where she'd come from. I led her through the woods, taking the long trail past the creek and up towards the ridge. She watched everything, the trees, the birds, the changing colors of the sky. She moved like she belonged in the woods more than I did. We walked for an hour. She never stumbled. No shoes, remember? Her feet never seemed to mind the brambles. When we got back to the main path, she looked out across the cornfields and smiled like she'd known them her whole life. Her name was Iris. That's what she told me. And from that night on, she showed up often, always near dusk, always in the woods, waiting like she knew I'd come. I never caught her walking up or leaving. She'd just be there. I never saw her with a car, never saw her ask for anything. We talked more each time. I'd speak about the farm, about my father, about the animals. She'd listen with that same patient interest. And over time, I fell in love with her. Wasn't fast, but it was deep, like roots pushing slow through a rock. She eventually came to live on the farm, moved into the house like she'd always belonged in it. Folks in town were surprised, sure. Some had questions, but I kept the answers simple. And that was that. Over time, I began noticing things. The garden bloomed twice as fast when she tended it. Animals, rabbits, foxes, even the crows never ran from her. They'd come close, watch her move, almost like they understood her. Even old Buck, who barked at every stranger, took to her like she was family. And she never aged. Not really. Years passed and she stayed the same. Just as graceful, just as quiet. Her eyes never lost that shine. And one night, late into winter, when the trees were bare and the moon was high, she told me the truth. She wasn't human. Not in the way I understood it. She said she was one of the old ones, a guardian of the forest, a green lady, as they used to be called. Spirits of the land who watched over the wild places, kept the balance. They were caretakers once, protectors of animals, trees, rivers, all things natural. People used to respect them, leave them offerings, speak their names in prayer. But as towns grew and forests shrank, her kind faded into the background, forgotten, driven deeper into the woods. She said she shouldn't have been among people, but she'd been lonely. She was expecting fear or anger. But I wasn't afraid. I didn't care what she was, only who she was. We made a promise to each other that night. She'd live here with me, as long as I, and whoever came after me, respected what she was. That meant no hunting for sport, no cutting trees without reason, no turning the wild into something unnatural. And every season, we would give something back. A basket of the first harvest, corn, squash, apples, left at the edge of the woods as thanks. That was the deal. And it worked. The land stayed strong. The forest stayed quiet. Our home thrived, not just because we worked hard, but because we worked in balance. Iris never asked for anything more. She just wanted to belong, to be seen and accepted. And I never broke that promise. Not once. Iris stayed with me for many decades. We made a life together. Simple, steady, good. She loved the rhythms of human life more than I expected. She liked baking, reading old books, humming songs I never recognized. She planted herb gardens that grew wild and sweet, and every spring she'd guide birds to the windowsills like they were visiting old friends. When the time came, she raised children, quietly, never forgetting who she was, but choosing to live as one of us. But her time wasn't meant to last forever. The forest had given her to me, but it had only loaned her for a while. I saw the change slowly. She moved differently in the last months, quieter than usual, even for her. She spent more time near the edge of the woods, sitting among the trees, eyes half closed, like she was listening for something only she could hear. One day, she simply stood out there too long, barefoot in the cold grass, and when I walked over, I could feel it. It was time. She didn't leave like a person. She didn't die either. She returned. That's the best way I can put it. She walked barefoot into the trees, and when I reached her again, there was no body left to hold, just soft moss underfoot, wildflowers blooming where she'd stood, vines curling up the bark in patterns I'd never seen before. It wasn't sad, wasn't frightening. It felt, well, natural, like the forest was welcoming one of its own home. But before she went, she left a promise behind, one I carry with me still. As long as we honor the agreement, the land will protect us. If we treat it as borrowed, not owned, and keep to the path she laid out, we'll live in peace. But if we ever forget, if we take too much, poison the ground, hunt for sport, or cut down the old trees without cause, she will return, and not as the woman I loved. She'll return as the guardian she once was, fierce, wild, and unstoppable. I never tested that warning, and I never will. I never remarried. Couldn't. I still feel her in the trees sometimes, especially in spring, when the wind stirs the leaves a certain way, or when the wildflowers bloom near the creek bed she used to visit. She's still there, not gone, just watching, quiet and patient. So I keep the traditions. I leave the offering basket every harvest. I teach the young ones to tread lightly in the woods, to greet the animals with respect, and never take more than we need. I remind them that this land is a gift, but it's not ours. It's hers. Jackson didn't speak at first. He just sat there, still as stone, eyes low, fingers steepled in front of his mouth like he was holding something in. I didn't press him. I let the story sit between us, the way a field rests after harvest. Finally, his voice came soft. So, she wasn't just my grandma. I nodded. She was more than most folks could ever understand. But she was your grandma. She loved you. Just because she came from the woods doesn't make the rest of it any less real. He looked toward the window, where the tree line barely showed in the firelight. All those days, she'd sit out in the garden and hum to herself. I used to think she was just weird. She was listening, I replied, to things most people never hear. He was quiet again for a moment, then said, "Is that why we weren't allowed to chop wood from the western grove? Or why we had to bury the scraps from the offering basket instead of tossing them?" "Exactly. That grove was part of her," I began. "And the offerings weren't trash. They were thanks." Jackson leaned back in his chair, shaking his head. I used to roll my eyes at all that. I thought you were just being old-fashioned." "Old-fashioned doesn't mean wrong. Traditions come from somewhere," I said. He gave a short laugh. "So my grandma was some ancient forest spirit. There's ghosts in the corn, and you did a blood ritual with iron and sage to seal off a monster." I smiled. "Yeah, that about covers it." "And you thought I wouldn't believe any of this?" he asked. "I thought you might leave in the morning if I told you all this right away." He stared into the fire, then gave a slow nod. I don't think I could walk away from this place now, not knowing what it holds." "That's good, because you might be the one who has to take care of it when I'm gone." He didn't answer right away, but the weight in his eyes changed. Not fear, not doubt, just the understanding that comes when a man finally sees something clearly. "I'll do it," he said. I reached over and put a hand on his shoulder. "Then we'll start tomorrow. You'll help with the offering. I'll show you the grove, and maybe, just maybe, if we're lucky, you'll hear her hum again." Jackson looked at me, brow furrowed. "You really think she's still out there?" I didn't hesitate. "I know she is." The fire cracked again, low and steady. Outside, the wind moved softly through the trees. We sat there in the warmth, surrounded by stories, by old wood and memory, and in the silence that followed, I could almost hear Iris's song carried faintly through the night, patient, eternal, and close. The land was still watching, but for now, it was at peace.